currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole is. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy, relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition. It's April 30th, 2014. Tonight's edition of DTRH is going to be a very interesting one. I'm very excited. For the first time on the broadcast, and yes, I know a lot of police officers, I know a lot of people in the military and stuff, and I know they listen, and that actually will be tonight's broadcast will be somewhat of a testament to that, because my guest is also a listener, which is kind of cool. But for the first time on DTRH, I actually have the pleasure of having an active duty police officer who is actually one of the good guys on to discuss things like the police state, the war on drugs, and more. The militarization of the police brutality, escalation of force, all this stuff, good cops versus bad cops, how to reach out to police officers and stop this, because that's the only way to break this vicious cycle. I spent like 2 hours talking to him off air before we came on air tonight, doing like a pre-show chat. And normally pre-show conversations only end up being like 15, 20 minutes at the most. And we almost ended up, just rolling over into the intro pretty much. He's just a really interesting individual to talk to. And it's really nice to be able to talk to somebody who's, again, I want to call him a peace officer, not police officer. Because actually he's his views on a lot of the things, well, you'll see. I don't want to sit here and bloviate too much. Let me give you a little bit of an introduction about who he is, and then I'm going to bring him up. All right, my guest tonight is Sergeant John Shirley. He grew up in Houston, Texas. He's the son of a veteran homicide detective, and he took his oath as a peace officer. See, and this was, by the way, I had him type up a description, as I always do with all my guests, really quick, and he calls himself a peace officer, not a police officer, not the law. He calls himself a peace officer. It's rooted in the individual's psyche. John's a really good guy, you'll see. Anyway, he took his oath as a peace officer in 1994, joining one of the largest police departments in southern United States. In his roughly 20 years of service, he's been a patrol officer, crime analyst, policy writer, internal affairs investigator, homicide investigator, and financial crimes investigator. You know what I like in there? I don't see anything about war on drugs lackey in there. I like that. Another thing I respect, and you'll see why. John's a man of integrity. That's why he's on my broadcast tonight. He's one of the original founding members of Oath Keepers, joining back in 2009. He later became the vice president and then president of the Texas chapter. He now serves on the Oath Keepers National Board of Directors. He's currently living in Texas. He is also a member of L.E.A.P, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. So, I mean, obviously you can see tonight's guest is going to be super, super interesting. So without wasting any more time, let's bring him up. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Sergeant John Shirley. John, welcome to the broadcast, my friend.
Well, thank you, Popeye. It's good to be here.
First, I just want to say to you, and I said this off air to you already, so you already know this. I want to say to you in front of listeners, I commend you for having the courage. You're still an active duty police officer, and you have the courage to not only come on my broadcast, but you've also been listening apparently for pretty much since I've been doing radio. And I want to say thank you for having the courage as someone in your position, and we'll get into that, and I know you understand this. Being in the position that you're in and surrounded by the stuff that you're surrounded by, it takes a lot of courage to stand your ground and actually, stay true to your convictions. So I want to thank you for that, because it's in this day and age, it's really hard to find somebody, a good cop, basically, for lack of a better term. If you want to break it down to, the simplest of terms, it's hard to find a good cop. And, as a veteran, firefighter, first responder, all that crap, I respect that. So thank you from me to you, John. I appreciate you actually standing up to your oath.
Well, I'm glad to be here tonight, and the important thing for me to let everybody know is that I believe that you shouldn't be afraid to speak the truth in the light of day, and there's nothing that I would say here that I wouldn't say in front of anybody, because at the end of the day, I'm going to be true to be an honorable person and to be true to my oath that I took when I became a police officer. And so there's nothing shameful or embarrassing or something I wouldn't be afraid to let people hear in the kind of things we're going to talk about. And on top of that, I'm still a citizen of the United States, and I still have a First Amendment right. So anyway.
Very well said, and very true. But it does take courage in this day and age to do what you're doing. So I needed to address that first and foremost, because it's and you are a good guy. Like you've passed the smell test. I would I would debate you if you were one of these idiots, but you're not. I wouldn't be giving you any type of praise if you were one of these jackboots, and you're not. You're actually what other officers, other peace officers should actually strive to be. You're something that they should look to you as an example, would be the best way to put it. And I like what your friends call you. They call you the uncop. I like that nickname.
Yeah, it's kind of it's been with me for a long time. And to be honest with you, I started out in my career pretty much like any other rookie cop. They pin a badge on your chest, and you're convinced you're going to go out and change the world. And very quickly in training and field training process, somehow your thinking changes. You realize that you're out there kind of by yourself, and that you've got all the policies and procedures of the police department, you've got the law, you've got all the bad guys, and you get this bunker mentality, and it sets them pretty early in their career, and it becomes an us versus them, and I stood out like that, like every other officer. But as time went on, I was exposed to other things, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, that I kind of had a transformation as an officer. And I was raised by a peace officer, so I've been around cops my entire life. In fact, some of the guys I worked with when I went to homicide division were guys who I've known since I was 6, 7 years old. So I've been around it my entire life. But as I went through my career, I went on a journey, and I ended up here, standing with Oath Keepers and telling guys to be true to your oath, and look at the Constitution as your guide. And it's been a very, very interesting ride throughout my career.
Well, first and foremost, let's hop right into it, because I know we have a ton to talk about in a short amount of time, and I want to give you as much time as you possibly need to pontificate on whatever. But first and foremost, I want to pick your brain about, compared to when you joined the police department, over 20 years ago to now, do you yourself, I mean, I know that the militarization goes back a wee bit further, but do you yourself see a huge drastic change in the way police departments are 20 years ago till now?
Well, I can only speak for my agency, and it's been a gradual change, the university change, and it was let me back up a little bit. It was a very steady change until 9/11, and then you had all the funding and all the new training that came in, and it seems like the attitude somewhat changed in the agencies. But I think that like most things in most organizations, the reality of the day-to-day operations followed the training, and I think the training kind of changed. It became more military oriented. They expanded our riot control squad, which at the time I was actually a member of that, and it was but it's been an evolutionary change, not a revolutionary change, I guess is probably the best way to put it.
And from your standpoint, does it bother you? I mean, as somebody that signed up to you took an oath. You obviously you didn't want to be a revenue generator or anything like that. We can get into that. Does it bother you to see this slow, gradual change? And obviously drastic after 9/11. But does it bother you to see this change?
Well, absolutely, because it's not the job of the police to be the military. You've got two very well defined job functions. Peace officers are there to keep the peace among the citizens. We operate under a completely different set of rules, quote-unquote rules of engagement, than the military. We're not there to put our hand down on the population and control them. We're supposed to be there to help clean up some messes when people can't handle things themselves. And so, to me, the blurring of those lines is a disservice to the police officers. It's a disservice to the citizens we serve, because it's not our mission. We're not the military. We shouldn't be dressing like the military. We shouldn't be equipped like the military. We shouldn't react to situations like the military. It's not our job.
Well, I couldn't have said it any better myself, and I think it's all the more powerful coming from you. And truer words couldn't have been spoken. It's not the police or the sheriff's department's job to go out and literally be an occupying force. That's not what you guys are supposed to be doing. Like I've said on air, and I know you're a listener. We talked about this off air. I had the chance to be a New Jersey State police officer, and I mean, my foot was in the door, and I was like, nah, because I realized I just would have been a revenue generator. All I would have been doing was chasing people up and down the highway, pulling them over, giving them tickets, and being a jerk, trying to find reasons to arrest them and generate revenue to justify my job. And that's not what I wanted. If I was going to get into that kind of position of law enforcement, I wanted to actually, do what you did. You were a homicide investigator. You got a chance to actually help families whose maybe their loved one was killed, and you got a chance to at least bring them closure and bring the person that did it to justice. That's actually doing something positive. You're helping society. You know what I mean? To me, revenue generating, pulling somebody over, or even the war on drugs. Again, I commend you because there's a lot of things you don't agree with about that. Vice squads and all that stuff. Like your views are very refreshing because you don't often hear this stuff, and I can't wait to get into it with you, and listeners and stuff. But I don't want to stray too far off. So, the militarization of the police. One of the problems I see with it is this epic jump in police brutality, and there's this escalation of force. I know. I was in the Coast Guard. We did boardings. We worked with the Marines. We worked with government agencies. We worked with all different, aspects of law enforcement. We're pretty much federal law enforcement officers. And when we did boardings, we had an escalation. There was an escalation of violence that you would, you would come into a situation. You had to look at the situation, and every situation was different. That was the first thing you were taught. You didn't just jump into a situation and automatically start shooting everybody. You had a hand. I mean, yeah, you might have your gun drawn because you're trying to get everybody, on the ground or whatnot. But you didn't just automatically take somebody out. And in fact, we were trained to use non-lethal first, and then unless we were being shot at, then you kill. But we were trained to try to use non-lethal first and try to have this level of escalation. We're in step 1, step 2, and it's obviously. People can say, well, when you're in a firefight or when you're this or when you're that, look, I'm telling you, I understand, okay? I know what it's like to hear a bullet go whipping past your head, or have a gun pointed at you or a knife pulled on you, okay? I've even had it done in the civilian world, but you have to think, I mean, like I was telling you, when I used to work at the tattoo shop and I played bouncer there were times people were drunk, and I could have easily smashed their face into pulp, but I didn't. I did a little. I still used a level of violence because they were coming at me or trying to mess somebody else, but it wasn't to that level. I knew I needed to use a lesser degree of violence to solve the problem. Because I always made sure I tried to exhaust every situation before violence. It should always be a last resort. Now, with the militarization of the police, you see this ramping up of old ladies getting tased because they won't sign tickets, and they shoot people over the dumbest things. Like, it's insane. It's like we live in bizarro world. I mean, it's crazy. So with all of this going on, like, what do you think about this? What do you think of the obviously you're a smart guy. You have to admit there's a ramping up of this, police brutality. What do you think, in your estimation, as a police officer, or I don't even want to say police, as a peace officer for over 20 years, from an insider view, what do you see as one of the largest problems with this escalation of violence? Why is it happening?
Wow, that is a big question, and I think I want to say first that I think there's always been a certain level of brutality by the police, unacceptable actions, unacceptable use of force, and I think that. And this isn't talking about tasing granny. This is talking about your, if you want to say, garden variety use of force violations. There's always been cops that were too aggressive. I think that the age of portable electronics, the age of cell phones and video cameras, I think that in some ways has brought the perception much higher among the middle class and the upper class. I think that the people who lived in blighted areas, I think they've always kind of had a knowledge of some level of unreasonable police violence. So it was nothing new to them. But I think that the advent of portable electronics has kind of opened the eyes of everybody else that it's going on. And it's going on with regularity. And I think, unfortunately, it's proven out that so many times it seems like there's never any justice for those that are involved. And so I think part of it is a perception issue. I think part of it is that people's perception is heightened now because you've got things like cell phone cameras and everybody's got a camera. And so if there's a brutality situation, so many times now it's going to be captured, whereas 10 years ago it would not have ever been captured. That's one segment. And the other segment is your crazy, officers sexually assaulting people on the side of the road under the guise of some kind of search, or tasing granny, or what appears to be unjustified shootings of either unarmed or people who weren't posing a direct threat. Those kind of things, I don't even know how to quantify that. I don't even know how to respond to that, other than, it's happening and it's scary. Even as me being a peace officer, it's still scary for me to watch what really amounts to insane activity going on, and that my only hope is that as light of day is shown on these absolutely crazy activities, that they're corrected. And I will say it seems like that the bizarro use of force things, they do seem to be, at least from my impression, handled. Officers who are doing the crazy crap, sexually assaulting people on the side of the road, strip searching, tasing, whatever. It seems like those are being dealt with, but yet they still keep happening. So to me, almost the question with that kind of crazy stuff is, why is it if the people who are being held, who are perpetrating these crimes, are being held responsible, why do they keep happening? And then the other issue is, you've got the accepted level. Say accepted, that's not really the right way to put it. You've got the what historical level of brutality that has always been there, but now is just better perceived by the population as a whole. So I think you're almost dealing with two different issues.
And that's the thing. They're both intertwined, and it's a much deeper issue than just, cops are dicks. It's not that easy. And then there's also the vicious cycle of, like I was talking to you off air about, you have the police are taught one thing. The citizens are against you. This is a thankless job. Nobody cares about us. Blah, 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 blah. And that is pumped into their heads. And that we're at a war with scum, and, the locals hate you, and, blah, blah, blah. So they pump that into their heads. And then the citizens see the police doing the things that they do. Like you said, a lot of these needless, where they go out and they it's almost like they're on a patrol in a military zone, the way they act. And because of the interactions that they have, they're usually negative because they turn out bad. Then the people, the local population, their view of it gets skewered, and they don't like the police officers, and they're angry at them, they're mad at them for whatever the case may be, and then their attitude is shown towards the police. Maybe they do videos. Maybe they tell the cops, they're videotaping. Oh, you guys are scumbags, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So then now the cops are feeling that energy. So that reinforces to the cop what they've been told already in the crap that they've been fed. Oh my God, they hate you, blah, blah. Well, now it's what they see is that being reinforced because they feel that anger. They don't, they're not looking at it from an outsider's perspective with some logic because they're involved and there's emotion involved. So they get fed that, and then that feeds them to go do more stupid things, which then enrages the public again, which then feeds back to them, and then they do and it's like this circle. And the only way it's going to get stopped is if we break that circle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a classic feedback loop is the phrase that I would use for that. And I think part of that stems from overly proactive policing. I think so many times officers are encouraged to go out there and quote unquote crush crime, and so they go out there and they initiate these police actions with people, and it just seems like that's where so many complaints are generated, and that's where so much bad blood between the officers and the communities they serve. That's where it stems from, are these proactive initiated crimes that I think statistically could be argued don't have any impact on the overall crime rate of an area. And I do have some experience with working with a hotspot squad where we had several officers and myself and another supervisor who we concentrated on one small area in the area we worked. And when I say small, just 1 or 2 square miles, where we concentrated heavily, and this was a night shift, and we put like 60 or 70 felons in jail over a 1-month period out of this one area. And granted, this was a high crime area already, but we put 60 or 70 felons in jail in 1 month in this area. And at the end of the month, they ran the crime stats, and the crime stats were basically untouched from prior months. And so my argument is so much of proactive policing, while it may drive arrest stats up, it has no overall impact on crime. The crimes that people really care about, burglaries, robberies, rapes, murders, it has no impact on those crimes. And so because those interactions are the ones that, in my opinion, fuel that feedback loop of officers see the population as a problem. Population sees officers as a problem. And because those proactive activities, I think, feed into that feedback loop, I think that's one place where we could try to stop this cycle, is not tell officers they can't do proactive police work, but to take that focus away. Don't let arrests drive your stats. In other words, I don't necessarily think we should be prideful that we can say we're calculating and we're proud about this number of people we put in jail, the number of people whose rights we took away. Why are we trumpeting? Look at all the people's rights were taken away. Why don't we really work on effective strategies to reduce the real crime, which is the crime that impacts everybody, and like the one that I spoke about before. So anyway, just one thought.
No, I agree. I'm gonna pause us because the break is sneaking up. So it's a perfect spot to pause it. When we come back on the other side, there's a bunch of other stuff I want to pick your brain on. Ladies and gentlemen, I told you, John's a very interesting individual. He's actually a peace officer, and look, he's actually a free-thinking, out-of-the-box thinker. It's actually quite nice. It's quite refreshing to have this conversation and be able to talk to him. See, I told you, not all peace officers are bad. I know I have a tendency to rank on them, and I do take the ones that are bad to the woodshed, but I'm trying to show you that there is hope. John's one smart cookie. Don't go anywhere. Epic broadcast underway. Stay tuned. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. Having an epic conversation with Sergeant John Shirley. Remember, he's an active peace officer right now. And you're hearing, I told you, there are still some good guys out there. And I talk about negative stuff so much. I'm trying to put out more positive energy. Not saying that I'm going to stop talking about the negative stuff, because I do talk about it in a way that I don't think puts out fear and stuff. But it's important to have people like John on, because you need to be reminded that even though it's bad, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There are good people out there. There are still good guys, okay? And if there's one thing I aim to do with my broadcast is to prove to you that two things, okay, two very basic, simple things. That one, okay, we are going to save the world. That's one. And a side caveat of that is the fact that there are superheroes out there. There really are superheroes out there. Now, the second thing I want you to realize that those superheroes are you. Every single one of you, okay? But in order for you to sometimes stay positive and stay on that track, I can't constantly talk about negative or the negative stuff in such a way that it's, I put forth, every cop is a piece of crap or blah, 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 because that's not true. And I would be remiss in my duties, we'll say, if I was putting forth information like that. Now, yes, the margin of good cops versus bad cops, good police, whatever, bad police, it's getting more that there's more bad ones in there, but that's because the good ones get pushed out. They lower the IQ standards, blah, 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 blah. I've gone over this 100 times. But there still are good guys out there, and I think that there is, there's still a chance. I don't think the fat lady has sung, and as I said to you thousands of times before, I do still see the light at the end of the tunnel. And having Sergeant Shirley on tonight is, like I said, a breath of fresh air, because it goes to show you that there still are good guys out there. So anyway, enough of my bloviating. I want to get back to talking to John. So, John, in regards to what we're talking about, the militarization of the police brutality, things like that, the war on drugs always comes up. And it comes up because it's used as a justification to break into people's houses at 3 o'clock in the morning, shoot their dogs, shoot their kids, and they'll say it was an accident, whatever. And the police will always, the police unions and the chiefs, captains, whatever, will always go on TV and always in their reports always back the officers and say, well, it was, drugs and raid. Even if the SWAT team raids the wrong house, it's always justified, under, well, the war on drugs, the greater good. And I think that fuels this militarization and police brutality epidemic as well. What say you on the subject?
Well, I think first and foremost, the war on drugs is driven by money. And, with so many things driven by money, but the war on drugs, in my opinion, is driven by money. And that's, budgetary money to anti-drug campaigns, budgetary money to fund new units and overtime programs and equipment, and so that's the main driver. I think that you need to be understood. And once again, I think we're talking about the money drives the program. So you've got money going into a drug program, and so they're going to increase enforcement, and it leads back to what we were discussing earlier with the proactive interactions, and I think also the communities that seem to be targeted by these programs are ones that may not view the enforcement of drug laws like the police department does. You might have a level of acceptance at some level higher, so that they see the police coming in enforcing these drug laws as almost like an occupying force, and it does nothing but increase the anxiety between the police and the people, and that runs the whole gambit of the entire drug war, and I think we need to take a step back and look at the last 40 years of the drug war and ask ourselves, what really have we accomplished? With all the money spent, all the lives, both on the police and the civilian side, all the property confiscated, what have we really accomplished with the drug war? Has it met its goals? Has it met any of its goals? And if not, then maybe we should try something else. And that's not even talking about what you really think about things like marijuana legalization. That's just really looking at the logical, what's the result of all the money spent and the time spent? What is the result? Has it been successful? And if it hasn't, let's try something else. And I think if you took a honest look at the drug war of the past 40 years, I would say it's been a complete and colossal failure, and it's led to destroyed lives on both inside law enforcement and outside law enforcement. And I really think that if we would take half the money that we spend on enforcement and put it into treatment programs and putting people through rehabilitation instead of into a prison cell, I think maybe we'd look at 40 years from now in the future, we'd look back and think, man, I'm glad finally we made a change, because banging your head against a wall and expecting a different result than a bloody skull is unrealistic.
I agree, and it's like the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result is literally the definition of insanity, and that's where we're at right now. And then you can break the war on drugs down into so many different levels. Like you said, you're not even talking about the legalization of cannabis for medical use or even recreational use. Overall, it's ridiculous. I mean, if you look at the whole thing, like, is it worth the people that have died, the civilians that have died in crossfires, the innocent people? Okay, put them aside now. We talked about them first. Put them aside. To the law enforcement officers out there that hear this broadcast, how about your fellow brothers that have died? Like, why did they die? They were fighting the war on drugs. No, dude, they died fighting for crap, okay? They would have been more honorable dying if they were saving a kid from a car wreck or something and somebody hit the car or anything else other than that. Because they didn't, it's like my brothers and sisters that died in the war on terror. They died for lies too. My friends that are gone, they died for lies. The first thing I had to admit was that was the truth. It sucks, but it is. I mean, the war on drugs didn't make any of them any richer. It didn't enlighten the lives of their families. I'm sure their families were shattered by their deaths. You guys are upset about it. If you lose your friends, your fellow officers, and I'm not even talking about the civilian side. I'm just trying to aim it at them, trying to make the officers think. Think about your own. If nothing else, just think about your own for a minute. I mean, what did you gain from losing all those guys? Nothing. There's some cartel people that are richer, some bankers that are definitely richer. The only people that I ever see benefiting from this whole drug war thing are the bankers, because they're the ones that win on both ends. Governments have to take loans out to buy all this expensive equipment, and the drug cartels need somebody to launder the money. Wow, it's amazing who makes the money. It's just like wars, how banks fund both sides. Maybe who are the real criminals? Maybe we should ponder that for a minute. So it's just, and your thoughts on that, John, as a police officer, again, as someone who's been in the trenches for over 20 years, what are your thoughts on what I just said? If I came to you and I said war on drugs, maybe you were for it a little bit or whatnot. But if I came to you and said the war on drugs is retarded, and I listed all the reasons I just did, and I tried to come at you that way as a police officer, do you think that's an effective way to maybe try to reach out to other officers for people, maybe people that are family of officers or friends?
Well, in my experience in my agency, I think that outside of your narcotics units, outside of your specialized divisions who deal with the drug crimes, I think there's once again, generalizing is always inaccurate at some level, but I think to a large degree officers don't have any faith in the war on drugs outside of the units that directly benefit from the fighting of it. So you have to draw a distinction between those that directly benefit from the fruits of the war on drugs versus your line officers. And I don't think there's any. I in my personal opinion, I don't see how any honest person can look at the war on drugs and think that it's been a colossal failure. What were the goals of the war on drugs? What were we going to do? Lower or decrease or eradicate use? That hasn't happened. Drive the costs up so much that nobody can afford it? That hasn't happened. Lower addiction rates? That hasn't happened. Lower the purity and the strength of the individual drugs? Well, that hasn't happened. So what has happened? What's happened has been wrecked lives on both sides of the equation. So it's been a failure, and I think officers who are honest would see that it is a failure, and so you've got to try something else. And you talked about it also. Who gains from it? There's the other side of the equation of you've got your private prison system that stands to gain by as many people as possible being put in jail. So that's another part of the equation is the whole prison industrial complex that we have operating in our country now, which, for those who don't know, we have more people in prison than anybody else in the world, including China and Korea. We have more. And the war on drugs, I think, is a major catalyst in keeping us the prison nation. And we got to try something else. We got to do something different because it's not getting any better. It's not making things better. It's ruining lives on all sides of the entire equation.
It's insanity. It's literally the definition of insanity, and it's not helping anybody at all. And like you said, the private prison industrial complex, that's a whole other thing. We're going to get into that in a little bit too. That whole thing. People have no idea. People are like, we live in America. We're free here. I wouldn't want to live in China. Ugh, they lock people up over there. And it's like, you realize we have, per capita, more people in jail than they do? Like, we have, out of every 1 in 4 prisoners in the world is locked up in the United States. That's the reality of the situation. And anybody that thinks differently needs to go do their homework. And here you have a peace officer. John, am I not correct?
You're correct.
Scary stuff. And then it's also a privatized form of slavery, which we'll get into, because then the prisoners are they make like 25 cents an hour, and they're sold out to or farmed out, I should say, almost like cattle, to private, these big corporations, Target, whoever. And when you call customer service at 3 o'clock in the morning, well, I guess we can just get into it now. When you call customer service at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're happy that you're talking to an American, because remember everybody got pissed off. Oh, they outsourced everything. Blah, 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 blah. I got to talk to some Pakistani guy or some Indian guy. I want Americans. Bring jobs home. Well, they brought the jobs back home, but they didn't give them to Bob or Nancy, who could have maybe used the job, maybe open a 24-hour call center, because that would have cost them money. They would have had to open a building, furnish it with lights, plumbing. They would have had to hire all these people, pay them benefits, give them a decent salary. It would have cost them too much money. So what do? They go to the prison industrial complex, and they use the prisoners as slave labor. They work for like 25 or 50 cents an hour, and the prisons bill these corporations probably like $15 or $20 per person per hour. And that's the reality of the situation. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, if you're talking to somebody that speaks perfect English and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, we're stationed here we're based here in the United States," more than likely you're talking to somebody in a jail, and they're sitting in a room that was set up with office cubicles and computer terminal access, and a lot of times you're giving credit card information to these people. That's the reality of the situation. John will concur with me, I'm sure. It is literally privatized slavery. John, what do you think? Prison industrial complex equals privatized slavery?
Well, I don't know any way else to look at it. I mean, you've got products and services being produced at below market values, severely below market values, by people who don't have really a choice other than to work. That equals slavery. So you've got entire industries who are benefiting off the number of people who are in jail, and I don't see how the society, how we can trumpet that. And I think, and I can't give you the exact numbers, but the percentage of people who are in our jails who are there for minor drug offenses, and what are we really accomplishing? We're giving someone cheap labor, giving a company cheap labor, but we're incarcerating and removing people's freedoms for what at the most is an addiction. I don't see how all that adds up, and it's finding a way to get the public to acknowledge that the system is broken and that we have to make a change, and it all ties together. You've got your things like your mandatory sentences for certain laws, and you've got your private prisons. So you've got a profit motive in running a jail. Why would we have a profit motive in running an operation that denies people their rights? Why would there ever be a situation in a free country where we build a profit motive in increasing the number of people who have their rights removed? That whole concept, it just blows me away. So the prison industrial complex is just, it's sickening that a country that purports to be free and purports to be the beacon of hope for the world, and yet we have more people in jail than anybody else. And I think at the end of the day, it means we've got too many laws, and honestly, in certain ways, too much policing going on. We're a free people. We should be able to enjoy the freedom. And if our system works, we shouldn't need so many laws and so many people in prison if our system works. So, and so if it's not working, well, let's change the system. Let's change the laws. Let's change the way we're attacking the problems of addiction and incarceration, and look at something different, because what we're doing is not working.
Yeah, clearly it's not working. And besides, addiction is looked at in there's so many. It's not just one issue. I mean, there's like when it just comes to like drugs itself. It's not just one thing that drives people to use drugs, and there's so many different. It's like anything else. It's not just one. It's not simply cut and dry. There's a lot more to it. But if you look at it, society itself, you can chalk this up to how many different reasons you want, but society doesn't handle problems, or we as a society do not handle problems the proper way. We attack the symptoms, but we never really try to figure out the underlying root cause, because it's either too hard or too much work, or nobody wants to actually have that kind of introspection on whatever level. But when it comes to addiction, and this is what I find in almost every case, that the people that started to drink, do drugs, or whatever their addiction is, it was to cover up a hole, for lack of a better term, inside of them, something that they had missing. And throwing them in jail is not going to solve that problem. Ruining their lives further and causing them further stress is certainly not going to help the situation. Treating them like they're a rapist or a serial killer with a gun pointed at their head for smoking a joint, or even if they're doing coke or something else. I mean, let's be honest. That person probably I'm not talking about the partier that just wants to get high. I'm talking about people that do, they have like hardcore addictions and stuff. Usually it's because they're trying to cover something up. So why not try to like relate to that person on a human level and try to tell them, hey man, it's okay. I know you're in a bad spot, but I'm reaching out to you. You're in the darkness. Here's my hand. As a fellow human being, let me show you some love and respect. No, society is not taught that. We shun those people. We attack them. It's almost like we fear them and attack them because they represent the darker portions of our very own psyches on a collective level, and everybody's afraid to face that, their own personal demons. I don't know. I know I'm getting a bit deep, but society just doesn't handle problems the way they should. We look at situations and we attack the symptoms, basically, if you want to put it in layman's terms. And we don't try to find a deeper solution. And, that's one of the problems with the war on drugs is everybody thinks that I meet people all the time and they're, I'll have conversations with them, and not even about talking truth or whatnot, or, we could just be, somebody I meet, however, through life. And in random conversation, if it comes up about drugs or this or that, or, people crime, their solution is always call the cops and have them thrown in jail to, whoever. And I'm like, you realize how stupid that is, right? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you're not solving the problem. You're going to put them in jail, and now you're just making the person a privatized slave. And I've actually had people tell me they really don't care, because it doesn't affect them. And I'm like, but it does. Because what happens if it's your kid or your husband or you that goes into jail? And, well, I wouldn't go to jail because I don't break the law. They bring, 40,000 new laws every year on the books, which they proudly proclaim, by the way, every January 1st, 40,000 new laws go into the books. We shouldn't be happy about that, people. That shouldn't be something you share on Facebook and like, oh, cool, look, 40,000 new rules. That should be a wake-up call to you that there's a problem. I mean, we keep making rules for everything. You can't pee. You can't, did you ask permission to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and take a leak? Well, no, if you didn't file the proper paperwork with the government, you can't get up and take a leak at 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that's where it's headed to. Really, it's insane, and a lot of this feeds that private prison industrial complex beast that we've been discussing, and it's just absolutely disgusting. I can't describe it any other way than privatized slavery. And if people can't see it, and if that's too, oh my God, he said slavery, well, shut up, because you're part of the problem. Because we can't even have an adult conversation about this stuff without you freaking out. You know what I mean? John, what say you? We got a few minutes left for the break. What say you on what I just said?
So I think, something else is we forget the law of unintended consequences always sets in situations like this. And you've got someone sent to prison for what could be, in this hypothetical scenario, a minor drug offense. Well, prison is, in all intents and purposes, criminal school. That's where people trade their craft. And so you've got someone thrown into a prison situation there, which is shocking and horrible, and so they're going to do anything they can to fit in. Well, all of a sudden they're fitting in, and they're learning about how to be a better criminal, how to get around the law, how to do whatever more efficiently. And then they get out. And by the time they get out, most people are convinced that they're going to go straight. They're not ever going to be back in jail again. But they get out, and because they have a record now, they can't get a decent job. They're shunned by quote-unquote normal society. And so then they're thrown back into, well, you know what, I've got to eat, I've got to live, so I'm going to skirt the dark side. And so then they get caught again, and they're sent back to jail, and the cycle begins again. They're in jail, they're being better trained now this next time to be a criminal, and so and the cycle starts and continues on, and you've got basically a permanent underclass created by what potentially was a very minor infraction in the very beginning, and it just feeds the system. And it's the police, it's the prison complex, it's the justice system, the so-called justice system. And it's a big mess. And I've been looking at it from the inside for a long time, and it's just a big mess, and I just wish it could change.
Well, the only way it's going to change is if people have these conversations, and, if officers are willing to actually talk about this stuff. That's why I gave you the kudos I did in the beginning, because, look, let's be honest, even though it shouldn't be this way, it is this way, and it takes a lot of courage for somebody in your position to come out and literally, with your real name and everything, actually talk about this stuff, because sometimes there are people that have to pay repercussions for what they talk about and the truth they speak. And I'm not saying that's right, but that's the truth, and it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing, John. And I wholeheartedly appreciate it, because these conversations are what's going to change the attitude. Your fellow officers are going to hear this broadcast. They're going to hear us talking, and they're going to hear what you have to say in full context of the conversation with me. And maybe, just maybe, one of them might go, you know what? John's right. What the hell's going on? And that in and of itself is a very powerful thing. And again, I give you credit, because that's what is actually going to change things for the better. So,
well, I want to say I don't speak for my agency. I don't speak for anybody but myself and my experiences. I've spent 20 years in the trenches in a major city, and these are my opinions. And I can tell you that in the 20 years I've been doing my job, not many problems at a large scale have been solved. And in fact, some of them have gotten worse. So I'm just here saying that, what, let's be open-minded to look at a different way. Let's be open to the idea of doing something differently, because maybe we'll get a better result next time, because what we're doing now just does not seem to be very effective.
Yeah, but that's the common sense approach to it. I mean, anybody with half a brain would look at the situation, and what's going on, and say, well, that's what we should do. But again, that gets into the much larger agenda. I'm going to pause us right there, because the break is sneaking up. Ladies and gentlemen, do not go anywhere. We have another hour. I'm telling you, John's a really awesome individual. I want to get into his head a little bit about L.E.A.P, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, push that a little bit, and get into a few other topics. So do not go anywhere. 3 short minutes, you know how it works. Stay tuned. I promise. Another epic hour. As always. Never not epic on this broadcast. Who are we kidding? Alright, I'll stop with the ego. I'll behave myself. Anyway, we're off the break. I'll see you in 3 short minutes. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from FederalJack.com. It is April 30th, 2014. Tonight, I am having one of the best interviews I think I've ever had a chance to do live on this broadcast. And I say that with all honest sincerity. This is a very important broadcast, because I know some of Sergeant Shirley's co-workers will inevitably hear this broadcast at some point in their day or evening. And, it's important for them to hear this real conversation about real topics, whether or not they think it's kooky or not, or, oh, stop, blah, blah, blah. It's important for them to hear this stuff. And it's important for you all to hear this, too, because, as I said, look, not all cops are bad cops. And I have to reiterate this, because I talk about the bad stuff so much that, to a certain degree, I almost become, and I stop myself purposely, I don't want to become part of that vicious cycle that I was talking about with John earlier, when I said that, you have the cops being told that the citizens hate them, and then you have the citizens themselves seeing the actions that the police do, that they consider to be bad, that fuels their anger, which then the cops see that anger, which then feeds that propaganda, and it's this vicious cycle. If I continuously come on air and just talk about bad police officers or peace officers or cops or whatever you want to call them, and I constantly just point out the bad ones, then I'm myself partaking in that action of putting out that negative energy and that fear. And yes, there are, look, I'll be straight up, and I'm going to be nice about this, or respectful, because John's a police officer and I don't want to be disrespectful to him or any of the officers that will hear this or any of the other cops that listen to my broadcast, so I'll be nice. There are some jackboot thug cops out there. Yes, there are some that do not use their brains. Unfortunately, the margin of ones that don't use their brains over the ones that do is widening. But there is still good people out there. And, you know, they probably have the same awakening that John did, where they realize that the policies that they're asking to, being asked to enforce, aren't really right, and they don't agree with them. And a lot of them do try to make positive change from the inside. And honestly, that's the only way we're going to get around this. We can't keep trying to butt heads with police officers and say, you guys are dick cops, man. You beat the hell out of this person. Yes, like the cops that killed that homeless guy, Kelly Thomas, that whole thing is a mess, and I think they should have been held to account. Personally, I think they should have gone to jail for murder. But again, putting them in jail does really what anyway? I know it's because it's the whole system is screwed up. But the powers that shouldn't be want us to hate the police, and they want the police to hate us, because that's the game. Officers, you must listen to this. This is extremely important. Okay. And then I'll go to John and get his take on this, and then we'll get into L.E.A.P and a couple other things. But you guys are being used. The powers that shouldn't be. I've talked about this with my friend Mark Passio before. Like, you could think that, calling myself Popeye or naming my show Down the Rabbit Hole's kooky, and why the hell would, Sarge be on this guy's show? He must be out of his mind. Go back and listen to my broadcast. Do yourself a favor and educate yourself and listen to some of the things I've talked about, okay? And listen to a broadcast I did, a couple of them I've done, with a guy named Mark Passio. And we've talked about police and the military. I was in the military, okay? I know. I was one of you guys once. You know what they called us? You know what they still call us? They're dogs. Because we're willing to do whatever they ask us to do. We're their obedient pets. They call us their pets or their dogs. And, they actually look at people like that lower than they look at humanity. They look at humanity, they literally call them the Walking Dead. But they look at you even lower because you're willing to do the things that you do against your fellow human beings for $1 and for your own safety or supposed safety and security, which you're not going to have. Because, again, if you look up history, go look up the Night of Long Knives or any other tyrannical government. Look what happened to the people that helped them get into power. They soon after were dealt with because they're too dangerous. They know too much. People got to go. That's how it works. Okay, so you're not in a special club. You're one of us. You're not one of them. And I did not want to keep perpetrating, and I will still point out bad cops and take them to the woodshed, and I won't stop that. But having somebody on like John tonight is extremely important. Extremely important, because it's important for not only the listeners to hear that, yeah, there are still good guys out there and give you guys some hope, but it's also important for the officers that hear this to understand that you guys need to step up. Okay, you're not with your masters. You're with us. You're not one of them. The people that you might hold some, contempt for, you think you're better than them, you're not. You're one of them. Take the chip off your shoulder and realize that you're one of us. That costume, you don't animate it. I've said this 1,000 times. You are not that costume. The costume is what gives you your supposed illusion of power. If you take it off, you take the badge off, the gun off, the ticket book, you try to do the same things, it would not work out the same way. I'm telling you. Okay? So if you understand that, I'm not picking on you. I want you guys to realize that we're all on the same team. That's why I'm trying to come at you in a respectful manner, not be like, man, you guys are jerks. I'm trying to not alienate you. I'm trying to help you understand here that this is something important. We have to have this conversation. I'm not afraid to sit down and have coffee with you guys and talk to you about this and debate philosophy and everything else. I encourage it. I absolutely encourage it. I encourage that over beating the crap out of somebody any day of the week. Any day of the week. Anyway, I've bloviated enough. Ladies and gentlemen, Back for hour number 2 with us is Sergeant John D. Shirley, and not only is he a member of Oath Keepers, but John is also a member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, which we'll get into. But John, what do you think? What are your thoughts on what I just had to say? Trying to speak directly to some of your fellow officers that might perhaps hear this broadcast. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I want to draw their attention back to where they get their authority. They get their authority from the Constitution, from the laws of the state, and those laws and the Constitution are derived from the people giving up some of their sovereignty to the government, and then by way of that to the peace officers. So the officers need to look back and see that they derive their just powers from the consent of the people, the citizens that they're sworn to protect, and that their job isn't to support the government. Their job is to protect the people. And I think it'd make a big difference if in initial officer training and the continuing education that officers are put through, to be drawn back and reminded that that's where you derive your power. You derive your powers, your authority from the people that you are serving. And I think over time, it would have a sea change effect because it changes the mindset of the officers from the controlling force to what they're supposed to be, which are public servants. They're serving the people, and so I think it would take a big chunk out of the us versus them mentality that you do unfortunately find in some law enforcement agencies, that they're there to partner with the people to help control the real crime in the community, and that's where you're going to find your effective police work anyway, is when you're truly partnering with the citizens you serve, and it starts with training, and it continues on in the field training process and the policies and procedures of the departments, that they're to partner with the people they're serving. They're to partner with the citizens. They're not to see them as the enemy, as the problem. Even in the worst ghettos you can think of in any major city, in those communities, probably a maximum of 5 to 10% of the people there are in any way associated with criminality. So if you look at it that way, you've got 90% of the population that if you're doing your job right and you're truly serving that community the way they need to be served, you've got 90% of the people on your side and who aren't the problem. You've got a very small segment. And so it's a head game with officers that you need to get out of the mentality of us versus them, of the police subculture. The citizens aren't your enemies. They're actually your biggest assets to do your job. And I've personally found that to be the truth, be it regular patrol or even murder investigations that I've run. It's the good people in that community where that crime happened that are going to help you solve that crime. And the wise officers will figure that out. But I think it could be helped by changing some strategies of training.
Well, in all the years I've been an activist and doing this, I've interacted different ways with police departments. And one of the things that always comes to my mind, and I've talked about this with other police officers, obviously not on air, but, in person, and they've always given me an excuse here or there, and, blah, 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 that limits people's job opportunities. But my proposal to stopping a lot of these problems would be that you have the officer, there's a prerequisite that the officer has to live either in the city, or if he lives outside the city, it has to be within like a 2-mile or a 3-mile radius of the city boundary, if they're even allowed to live outside the city. And I say that because if the officer has to live in the same city that he patrols the streets of, he might think twice about beating the crap out of somebody or having that thug mentality, because they are part of that community, so they have to go home and still live in the same community that they're driving around doing this in. I think that's a part of the big problem. Is it's easy now for an officer, and I'm not, again, it's the individual, it's their own. At the end of the day, everybody is responsible for their own personal actions. But I think it's easier because a lot of these officers, they live 40, 50 miles away from the city that they work in. That opens up a big problem because now they live far enough away that they can completely disconnect, and on the way to work, they can put themselves in a-hole mode, and then they go to work, they're jerks, and then they leave, and they drive 50 miles home, and they leave all of that behind, and that's all well and good for them, but look what all the, and that I tend to find that a lot of the cops, and this isn't the case in every situation, but I tend to find in more often than not, the police that tend to be involved in police brutality situations in a specific area are more often than not, they don't live there. And they don't live, within a 2 or 3 mile distance of it. They usually live further away. And I think that would go, and that's, again, it's not, none of these solutions are going to stop it by itself. It's, it's multifaceted, but I think that would go a long way to curbing a lot of that, because that would, talk about forcing the officer to maybe, rethink his position and his perspective on things, because now he has to live with the same people that he's patrolling around and interacting with that uniform on. He has to interact with them with that uniform off. So I think it would be a different change, and it would also help him understand the community better too, because then he would be more in depth, entrenched in the community, know what's going on in the community. He would probably be more apt to stop crime before it happened, because maybe he could talk somebody out of doing something stupid. Hey, Johnny, what are you doing? And maybe the kid was, he catches a kid with a bottle of liquor, and the kid hasn't, taken a swig of it yet. And he says, "Come on, man, what are you, stupid? Give me that thing and get out of here. Don't be an idiot. Let me catch you with this again. I don't have to arrest you. And get out of here." Like that community policing, the way it should be done, the way it used to be done when I was a kid. I just think that this is one of the solutions, because again, there's different things that could branch off. But we got about 11 minutes for the break, so the floor is yours. What are your thoughts on what I just said? Do you agree, disagree? Think it's a good idea?
Right. If you'd have asked me that question 12 years ago, I would have told you you're absolutely out of your mind. There's no way that you wish you should make an officer live in the area that he patrols, and that would have been the opinion of a young, non-knowledgeable peace officer. But faced with it now, I think it's not a bad idea. And if you look, in history, the way policing started with the whole night watchman system, they were members of that community. They had a vested interest in controlling crime in that community. And so if we fast forward to now, and I agree that most officers in my agency, or I can't say most, a lot of officers in my agency live way outside the city limits of the area. And I would say that if you brought them back and told them that you had to live there, that's a good thing, because that's calling us back to where you make them responsible for where they live, and that can't be a bad thing. And I know we talked about this a little bit earlier before the show, but kind of what fostered my evolution of thinking when it comes to policing. And when I graduated the academy, I was put in a high crime area, and I was in a police car, and I was going up and down the streets at 35, 40 miles an hour, responding call to call. Never really interacting with anybody but the people who were calling the police or with criminals. And that kind of fostered, it emboldened us versus the mentality, because you're only dealing with the problem people, the problem situations. Shortly after I got on the department, I volunteered for a pilot program of putting police officers on bicycles. And so several days a week as an overtime program, I would patrol on a bicycle. And just taking the officer out of the police car and putting them on something more accessible, like a bicycle, accessible by the citizens, and also traveling down the road at 10 miles an hour and not 35 miles an hour. It was amazing the differences in interactions you had with people throughout the day, and you had many more positive interactions than you did when you were sitting in a police car going from call to call to call. And it really kind of started changing my thinking that we've lost something with the whole quote-unquote radio patrol officer, super efficient, running from call to call and, emergency response to emergency response. I think we've lost something. We've lost the whole idea of the community officer. And a lot of officers take a very dim view toward community policing because they look at it like it's a bunch of warm kumbaya songs and hugging the criminal. But in my experience, if a department is truly enacting community policing, it's really just drawing officers back to the original roots of policing, which is your beat cop, your beat walking cop, your officer on the street who knows everybody in the community they serve. They know them by first name. They know the children. They know the kids who are going to skip school. They know who the kids who may be throwing eggs at cars. They know the problems, and they also know the solutions because they're working hand in hand with the people who live there, and who their vested interest is to solve the problem. So I went through my own evolution in the experience of going from regular patrol and adding on to bicycle patrol, and moving forward from there. That you really gotta, to serve your community, you have to know your community. You can't be expected to serve people that you don't know. And so it changed my way of thinking. And so I really took time to get to know a lot of people in the community I served, and it was amazing how much more effective I could perform my duties when I communicated with the people that I served, because they would talk to me like they would talk to one of their neighbors if they were having a problem. And so it enabled me to be able to solve a problem before it rose to the level of really needing to call the police. If they were having a dispute with a neighbor down the street or a kid, or they could talk to me about it, and we could work things out before it got to the point where they had to call the police in 911 or somebody got out of control. So it's a kind of a holistic view, of police work, and but it's mainly a change in mindset. And it's not hugging the criminal. It's becoming more effective at the job you do, and removing yourself from that, flash of black and white with flashing lights going down the road at however many miles per hour. You put a name and a face, and you can really affect change that way. And I don't think under the current regime of radio patrol, everything being dispatched over a computer, I don't think you can effectively serve your community in that doing just that. And I think that's what officers are being forced into because of what modern policing has turned into. I don't think they can be an effective force to work really at the community level. So there needs to be a change made, and I think that's how you'd start, by plugging officers back into the community.
I think it would be a start, and again, it's not an end-all, be-all solution, but I think it's a big step in the right direction. And you point something out that I think is interesting. And we've got about 5 minutes left here, so I got enough time to pontificate with you on this a little bit. But the hugging the criminal attitude, it's interesting. It shows you the mindset, and again, that goes to the training that they're instilled, because I understand how basic training and boot camp and brainwashing and all that stuff works. I went through it myself, so I get it. It really goes to the training. It goes to show you the attitude that's being instilled in their heads. You're hugging the criminal. Dude, you're not hugging any criminals. You're assuming right off the bat that everybody's guilty of something. Well, everybody's doing something wrong. Well, yeah, if you go according to the stupid laws on the books, how many laws do you break on your way to work in your police outfit? Okay, so let's be honest. Come on, it's insane. So if we're going to have an honest, logical conversation about it, we have to realize this. We have to realize that this is a horrible attitude to have. You're hugging the criminal. No, you're one of us. We're not criminals. We're your neighbors. That's why I think that attitude would get eradicated, or at least there would be a step in the right direction of eradicating that attitude, because they would, they wouldn't look at everybody like a criminal. Like, hey, this guy's not so bad. Like, look at me. Recently I did a video with Luke Radowski, and people saw me for the first time in years. Oh my God, Popeye! I'm covered in tattoos. Now, I always say, would you judge me based solely on my intellect if you could see me every day and see my tattoos, right? Would you judge me? Would you judge the book by the cover? Or now it's okay because people that listen to me, they're like, oh, cool tattoos, dude. Yeah, but would you have, and I'm not saying that not everybody wouldn't have been open-minded, but how many people wouldn't have been open-minded if they first saw the tattoos? They would have judged the book. Same way, if an officer gets to know the people, he might say, hey, wow, this guy's got tattoos, he looks like a thug, but he's a nice guy. He's actually really smart. And he's an intellectual, and he's a deep thinker. Maybe I should talk with him. Maybe we should have coffee sometime. Whatever. He's a nice guy. Maybe I could be friends with him. Maybe Mr. Smith down the street's an old World War II vet, and he's got some interesting stories. He might seem like a creepy old man, but the guy's just an old World War II vet or something. Or who the hell else knows all the other stories of all the different individuals in the neighborhood? And I think. And I'll let you pontificate this, for a few seconds before we go to break. But, I think it would really benefit you guys as officers, solving crimes, just overall. You guys would be more efficient, like you said. And I think that I just really think that overall it would solve a lot of problems across the board. The police brutality thing, the militarization, the attitude adjustment. I mean, and again, it's not the only step. It's just a step in the right direction. But I think a lot of this, like you said in the first hour, training. Training is key. We got about 2 minutes. What do you think? Change in training, change in mentality, and change in the way these police officers do what they do?
Absolutely. There needs to be much more training on ethics, a lot more training on their derived powers, a lot more training on individual liberties and rights, and how, draw a very hard line in the sand to tell an officer this is okay, this is not, because I think so many times officers are thrown out there with an unclear picture of what falls within the Constitution and what does not. And I think that gray area needs to be plugged. On top of that, I think we need to encourage departments to get away from some of the models they've used to quantify success. I know in a lot of agencies they use response times as the number one thing they look at to quantify whether they're doing their job or not. And I almost think that they've fallen to response time because they've waved the white flag when it comes to truly affecting the crime rate. So we can't affect the crime rate, so we're going to look at response times. Well, response times that are the most looked at are your Code 1 or what we call Code 1 and Code 2 calls, your serious emergency calls, in progress crimes or crimes that just occurred. So you're looking at what purports to be a very small fraction of police calls out there are your truly emergency calls, and we're going to set that as the bar as to whether we're doing our job or not, instead of how, and this is, some officers are not going to like this, how satisfied are our customers, people who we're serving, or the true effect we have on crime. We've switched, we've moved the target to something that we think we have a little bit of control over, but in actuality has very little impact or reflection of the
I'm going to cut us off really quick. We're back, ladies and gentlemen, final segment, and I'm telling you, this is turning out to be probably one of my favorite broadcasts I've ever done. And the reason being is because I'm constantly talking about these topics. I was telling John this off air. I constantly preach this stuff, and he knows because he's been a listener for a very long time, and he can confirm that. But I was telling him off air that it's important to have this conversation because it's important for his fellow officers to hear us having this conversation because it's not us versus them. It's this mentality that the powers that shouldn't be want us to adopt. It's how they think. Okay? They want us to think along the same sick, psychopathic lines that they do. That's how they control us. And it's important to get the message out to the police that we're not your enemy. We're not. We're your brothers, your sisters, your fathers, your sons, your mothers, your aunts, your uncles. We're your friends. We're you. Okay? We are you. I can't put it any clearer. You're not them. You're with us. It's a 3D game of chess, gentlemen and ladies. And you, as officers, are being played against us as the other chess pieces. You get it? And at the end, whatever's left gets cleaned up by some other bunch of schmucks that works for these very same people. The powers that shouldn't be. The only way to break the cycle and take control back and stop this insanity, and yeah, you can attack me as being a conspiracy theorist. I'll even let John pontificate on that, but it's the truth. And this broadcast is very important for you to hear because it might just change your mindset. Look, you can throw all the pejoratives at me you want. You can make fun of me. You can call me anything you want. Thug, tattoo, jerk off. Go ahead. Throw any name you want at me. I don't care. I don't care. Okay? It's important for you to understand. I think we're on the same team. Okay? As much as I might dislike how you do things, or I might dislike your personal attitude, and I think it needs to be adjusted to a certain degree, maybe some of you, I still refuse to play that game and hate you. I won't do it. I won't continue the cycle. I'm going to break it. You want to join me? Let's go. You want to be a robot? You want to be an automaton? Then I don't know what else to tell you. Then you just will be willingly or willfully ignorant, and that's pathetic, and that's not manly at all. I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to get thrown into the shredder as well. So you really need to put yourself in check and think, sit back and change your perspective on things. Again, look at yourself in the mirror. Just look at yourself in the mirror and say, is this worth it? Is this what I want to be? Am I a thug? Am I a revenue generator? Or did I sign up to actually help people? I mean, make a positive change. That's all you got to do. Well, I'm afraid. I don't want to get ostracized. Well, gee, that's the problem. You're afraid. And there's a whole litany of things. It's just people need to realize we're on the same team. It's that simple, okay? It's really, to put it in a nutshell, it's that simple. 3D chessboard, multiple levels these people play on because they think 5, 10 steps ahead of us, 20 steps ahead of us. They think in the long game. We're all on the same team. So all you officers that hear this, sheriffs, officers, police officers, whatever, it's important to understand that you guys are the very people, you ladies and gentlemen are the same people that you call criminals. Hugging the criminal. You're not hugging the criminal. You're hugging yourself. As soon as you understand that and get back to that mentality, things will start to turn around. And you'll realize that anger and hatred that people have of you will go away. I mean, there's a reason for it. It's valid and justified. Stop thinking that it's not valid or justified. That's the other problem. You've had it driven home to you by individuals that it's not valid or justified. Oh, it's totally valid and justified. And the fact that every time something bad happens, they always write it off as justified whatever. No. Start policing your own. If you guys started policing your own and started doing this stuff, I guarantee you'd get the respect of the community back in the blink of an eye. John, what do you think about that?
Well, this is, in a certain way, kind of segues into a topic that I know is a very hot-button topic with a lot of officers, and that's like civilian review boards. And they're not popular among officers to have complete autonomous civilian oversight. But as I move through my career, and because I do believe that we serve and are supposed to serve the communities that we're assigned to, I think that we need to take a hard look at civilian oversight, because once again, we derive our powers from those people, and our actions should be measured against the community standards. And honestly, the policies of the department should reflect the community standards. And honestly, if the policies reflect the community standards, then the officers' actions should be reflecting the community standards. And so there shouldn't be this knee-jerk reaction among officers that we can have a civilian review board. What do they know about police work? Well, you know what? At the end of the day, people and officers are judged by juries made up of normal citizens of the community. So we entrust them to take people's rights away and send them to prison, but we're not going to give them the trust to make a decision on whether an officer's actions were correct or not. So I do believe we should trust the community to have oversight over what happens in the police departments that serve them. And I think it's important to always frame it in those kind of words. The peace officers in that department are there to serve their community. They are the servants, and so we need to turn an eye of respect toward the people we serve, and to give them the authority to judge police action, because that's where we derive our powers. And when we get departments that are sensitive to the needs and desires of their specific communities, it'll take a big step toward tearing down that wall of separation between the officers and the community, because the community is going to start trusting officers better because they know the officers are going to be held responsible, and the officers will be attuned to serving the community needs instead of serving needs of the people in the state capitol or the people in downtown. It'll be, what does this community need? What do they want? What are their desires? And I think it's a difference of mindset, a difference of action.
And that kind of segues us into the next of the two topics I want to squeeze in here in the last 18 minutes we got with you. And again, thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. Politics in policing itself. I mean, how big of a problem? I know what, just the general politics of being a firefighter was, and then I knew that outside politics also influenced that. So I can only imagine, and that was 10 years ago, so I can only imagine what it's like now. Is politics in policing itself a huge problem?
Yes, it is, and I think it's mainly a mental exercise, I think, to a large degree, because, and I say that because I feel that politics has no place in being a peace officer / law enforcement. You've got the law and policy and procedure, and politics should not play a role in that. Justice is supposed to be blind, and I think that when you inject politics into that scenario, you're not dealing with blind justice. You're dealing with the scales being weighted one way or the other, and it really, for me, kind of reiterates a theme that Oath Keepers plays on a lot, with the fact that the sheriff of the county being the highest law enforcement, period, because they're responsible to the people directly because they're elected. I think that shows how important it is to have a person who is directly responsible to the people being over the peace officers, law enforcers of an area, because they are attuned in a way that others are not. And I'm specifically pointing to appointed positions. Most city police departments have either a appointed police chief or a public safety commissioner, and that level, adding that level of an appointed political position, adds an unnatural imbalance, I think, into the situation. And so instead of a sheriff or a person being directly elected for a specific purpose and in running on specific ideas, you become just one more cog. You have the appointed position just being one more cog in a big machine, and that appointed aspect insulates them from the desires and the needs of the community in a direct way that the direct election allows, and it just adulterates the injection of politics into police work. It just adulterates what's going on, because I really consider being a peace officer a calling, much in a way that the teachers are called to their service, and that even religious leaders are called to their service. I really do believe that good peace officers, it's that level of calling, and when you adulterate that level of commitment with the whims of politics, and politics is a capricious study, and it changes from day to day, and it causes those who are called to that position to become disillusioned and to lose sight of what they originally signed up for, and it just taints what should be a very honorable position in the community. It can taint it because you've always got that specter of the changing winds of politics behind it, and it increases distrust inside the organization, and honestly outside the organization as well. Because if you happen to be on the opposite end of the political spectrum than what the current winds of politics are, then you're going to feel disenfranchised.
You see, there's so many different levels to the things that are going on. It's not easy just to say that there's one quick, simple solution. That's why I wanted to have this conversation with you tonight, because it's important to talk about all this stuff. I think if we can get all this stuff on the table finally, if we can go over this logically and without emotion, and get the points across to everybody equally, that we're on the same level, and all the other important things that I would like for them to take away from this conversation tonight. I think we can really make a huge positive change. We got about 12 minutes. I want to pick your head. I want to shift gears. I want to pick your brain a little bit on LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Why you got involved, why you think it's a good organization, why you're against prohibition. I mean, I know we talked a little bit about it during the war on drugs, but I want to, focus on Law Enforcement Against Prohibition itself too, because again, I know a lot of officers are going to hear this, and it's important for them to hear that, hey, there's other law enforcement officers out there that do not agree with what's going on.
Well, I think one of the things I want to say in the very beginning is that I've never used cannabis. I've never used illegal drugs in any way, shape, or form. So this is, to me, a well-thought-out, logical response to all my experiences. And I heard about LEAP, 10 years ago, and kind of followed, their press releases and followed some of their speakers, and then as the internet really came online, and YouTube, following their different speakers on YouTube, and I'm really only a very recent official joiner of LEAP, but I know from my early days as a patrol officer, I just didn't see the value added to society by putting possession level cannabis possessors and users in jail and in prison and giving them a criminal record. I've never had to fight a suspect who was stoned on cannabis. I've had to fight plenty of suspects who were drunk, and plenty of suspects who are on harder, actual narcotics. But I've never had to fight somebody who'd been toking on a marijuana blunt. And I don't understand the incongruity that alcohol is a legal substance and cannabis is not. And I'm kind of the opinion, I enjoy a drink like anybody else, but I'm of the opinion if we're going to be logical and true, then alcohol should be illegal way before cannabis should be illegal, just based upon my personal experiences seeing the people who are influenced by those substances. So I would at least ask for some continuity. Now, but I can also say I'm of the belief that it should be legal, because I don't think a natural substance like cannabis, with all the potential pluses that cannabis has in a medical fashion, why it should be illegal. I think it's a waste, and kind of like what we talked about earlier. It's a waste of resources to fight it. It's a waste of resources to incarcerate people who have used it or who are possessing it. And I just don't think that society benefits as a whole by demonizing something like that. And I think you've got so many instances of otherwise law-abiding people who want to find some recreational enjoyment out of cannabis, in much the same way that every 21, 22-year-old finds with alcohol. I just think there's no logic in it being illegal, and I think it's a net loser for the law enforcement community as well as society as a whole. And it just kind of blows my mind that it's still illegal in so many places.
Well, there's a lot of people, like down here in Florida, we're trying to get medical cannabis, for instance, on the passed and get it. And I have no doubt that if people understood the full medicinal value of it, that it will get passed. And honestly, most people down here, the residents themselves, are just like, it's stupid that people can't have medical cannabis. But you have the Florida Sheriff's Association coming out against it. They came out, 2 or 3 days ago, and their official stance is, we're not for it because people aren't getting the facts. They're being given disinformation. If they legalize cannabis, oh my God, the earth will split in half, and Florida will be swallowed into a pit of flames, and it will cease to exist. It'll break off completely right on the state line. It'll just, as if it was just a puzzle piece, right? Come on. That's insanity. But that's literally like they're saying that there's all sorts of disinfo and everything else out there. As a member of L.E.A.P, look, as a peace officer with a brain in his head, what would you say, not representing your department, and I'll state that now, but what would you say to these sheriffs, just being, if you were coming to them as a human being and somebody who has 20-plus years law enforcement experience, so you're not just some radio guy, you're not easily dismissed, but you're coming to them as a human being and trying to reason with them on a human level, what would you say to them? Because literally, they're taking the stance of, you're being lied to, cannabis is horrible. Not even about the medical benefits, but just like any of the other crap that about, like law enforcement-wise, the benefits, and like they're not being lied to. So what would you say to them to like maybe try to sway their opinion?
Well, I think first and foremost would be a large percentage of your constituents, if they were honest, they either used it, or their children use it or used it. And so to say that, you're saying, let's just be generous, 35 to 40% of your population that you're supposedly serving are users or past users of this substance. And a good majority of them are law-abiding citizens, quote-unquote, otherwise, hold regular jobs, have regular lives. But this substance is illegal. Show us the true net effect negatively on society because of solely cannabis use. Show it to me. More so than any other legal substance, or heaven forbid, prescribed substance, the effects that those have on people. Show me the logic in one being legal versus one the other. Their entire argument is really just based upon, well, it's illegal. It's been illegal. It's got to be bad for you because it's illegal. There's not a logical argument that they can make, and it also gets back into the fiefdoms that are built around the war on drugs, including cannabis. So I just the arguments against legalization are tiresome to people who are educated and logical, and it's just time to move on. It's just ridiculous.
It is. It's completely ridiculous. I mean, this attitude that is pervasive is just retarded. But a lot of it is about making money too. Let's be honest, a lot of these police departments, that's a big revenue generator that they're going to lose. So, of course, they're going to be against it. That's why you got to look at someone's opinion on something, and just like they would say, well, your opinion doesn't hold any weight because, well, hate to tell you, but your opinion doesn't hold any weight really about that because you guys have a vested interest in keeping it illegal. So if you could actually give me a valid, 5 valid reasons why it should be illegal and, people should be locked up for it. Give me 5 valid reasons. I can give you one valid reason not. I can give you one valid reason. The top one. How about all the sick kids that it's helping? I've had all these moms on. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow night I'm going to have another one of the can of moms on talking about how it could help and benefit her child. Why are we making people suffer? Why? For what? For what? So you can make money and drive around in a cool cruiser? Really? You're going to make a kid suffer and try to keep something illegal so you could have a cool light bar in your career? I mean, think about it. That's what revenue generating is. That's what you're doing. You got to break it down. Think about it, guys. And I'm talking to the officers out there. Listen to what John had to say tonight. I'm really glad that you came on tonight because we only got about 3 minutes left. So I'm really glad that you came on tonight, John. And don't hang up. By the way, I'll say bye off air. But just very very powerful broadcast, brother. And you're going to be coming back on again. We'll be getting into some of these topics more in depth and other things too. I want to pick your brain about because, ladies and gentlemen, 2 hours again is never enough on my broadcast. But he's got a really great outlook on things, and I think it's important to have these conversations, and I think it's important to have them with smart individuals, especially such as yourself. So we got about 2 minutes here. Is there anything you want to plug? Facebook, Twitter, anything for L.E.A.P, Oath Keepers, or anything?
Well, of course I want to plug Oath Keepers. I've been involved in since 2009. It's for those who don't know, it's for current serving and veteran police officers and members of the military and firefighters and EMS personnel, those who swore an oath to the Constitution. And then the entire purpose for Oath Keepers is to remind those who took the oath to be true to their oath and to know what taking the oath really means, and to studying the Constitution. You can't go wrong if you stay true to your oath as a member of law enforcement or as a veteran. Always be cognizant and weigh the decisions you make, the orders you receive and the orders you follow. Always weigh them against the weight of the Constitution, because that should be your guide. On top of that, those keepers have been very active out at the Bundy Ranch situation. We've been there on the ground since really before the standoff took place, and there's lots of stuff that I'm sure we can probably talk about later going on out there. But we're on the ground. We pretty much have a presence in every state. We have 40 or 50,000 members nationwide. So go to oathkeepers.org, check it out, and get involved, because we're the tip of the spear. The powers that shouldn't be count on us to enact their rules. If we refuse to act, their rules can never be enforced. And so we can make a sea change. because they can't do it on their own. They need us to be their cronies. So, that being said, oathkeepers.org, it's a great organization. We also accept associate members for people who haven't taken an oath. We'll give you an oath, and then you can follow that oath. That's about the only plug I have.
Well, John, we are out of time, but thank you so much for coming on, brother.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I always say to you on every broadcast, the solutions to our problems are most definitely an inside job. Officers, I hope you listen to this broadcast. Those of you that hear it, I hope you take it to heart. We are you, you are us. We're all on the same team. Don't be a jackbooted thug. Love you all. Catch you all again live tomorrow night.